Hi, I'm Alan. My normal co-host, Dennis Sharon, is taking some time off enjoying a sabbatical from work. His sabbatical is part of a program we've developed at our firm to give our leaders a chance to disconnect, refresh, and come back invigorated. Since Dennis is out, we're going to rotate with some guest interviewers. Today, my co-host is Earl Blackman. Earl is one of the founding shareholders of our firm and is a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, as well as a CPA.
Today, Alan and I get the opportunity to speak with Rhett Ross. Rhett is the president and CEO of Continental Motors Group. His varied background includes serving in the U.S. Navy, helping send a rover to Mars, and now managing a company that builds small airplane engines. He shares with us how a focus on people and processes is what has made him successful in every position he's had.
Welcome to Playing Above the Line. We're a podcast that takes a peek into the daily lives of community and business leaders. Each week we uncover different views of the path to growth, leadership, and achieving success. I'm Dennis Sharon.
And I'm Alan Cave. Dennis and I are both shareholders at Hartman, Blackman & Kilgore. We're a full-service accounting and business consulting firm. As CPAs, we've had the unique opportunity to work with many different leaders and decided we wanted a way to share their incredible stories that we've learned along the way. Well, Earl, it's a little dreary outside, but it's a good-looking day in Deep Fried Studios. How are you?
Alan, it's always a great day when I can be here with you.
That is what you should say, absolutely. So we are honored to have today as our guest Rhett Ross, and Rhett is the president and CEO of Continental Motors Group. And so, Rhett, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here today.
So just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your background, and then what you're doing today, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. I'll give you the brief version of a long history.
Okay.
So I am a Gator. I graduated with degrees in nuclear engineering and mechanical engineering, joined the U.S. Navy, spent a little bit of time going around the ocean in a submarine, and then decided that being an engineer wasn't all it was cut out to be, so I went into management.
Okay.
But I've been involved in a number of great companies, anything from a startup developing alternative energy fuel cells to developing power systems that are driving around, nuclear power systems that are driving around Mars right now.
Okay.
Wow. To my current gig of running Continental Motors, which makes aircraft engines.
Earl, I think I might be in over my head here.
Yeah, this is way over my pay grade.
I'm a little worried. Let's start kind of from the beginning. You mentioned that you were in the Navy on a submarine. Talk a little bit about that. I'm assuming you learned a lot about interpersonal skills. When you're. How many folks were there? I mean, just talk a little bit about that experience and kind of what it taught you about dealing with people, which, as a CEO of a company now, you've got to deal with all sorts of personalities and that kind of thing. So how did that kind of help?
Well, it's interesting. The Navy has a good process. They make sure you're trained up on all this. They make sure you're going to be okay in there. But you are ultimately on a 33-foot diameter tube with another 150 men on average. Back in my day, it was only men. I'm sorry, Terry, but we would squeeze as many, if we were on certain types of ops, we'd squeeze as many as 190 men on board there, and which means that everybody was what they call hot racking. So somebody goes to sleep, they get up, somebody else rolls in right after them. We shove people to sleep on top of torpedoes, which if you've never done that, that's, it's one of those things you can kind of put in your bucket list book, slept on a torpedo.
Make sure you're off while they shoot that thing out of the submarine, though.
Oh, yeah, and you're sharing a sum total of, with all of those men, you're sharing a sum total of like 10 commodes on the whole thing. But, it's what do they teach you? They teach you how to manage relationships very well. They, the thing that taught me more than anything is planning and what are the keys to motivating or keeping people. And you wouldn't believe, but the one thing on a submarine that could not change without the captain's personal signature? The menu.
Really?
Wow. So
I didn't know that.
They set a menu for the submarine. And you think about this. You're in a tube. You can't see the sun. You're down for months at a time. There are a few things that really people can look forward to. And the meal is one of them. And so they set the meal schedule once a week. The head cook goes over it with the executive officer, and the captain signs off on it. But if for some reason suddenly we're supposed to have steak on Tuesday and the grill's down and they can't cook steak, the CEO's got to know about that, because if they're going to suddenly substitute sandwiches for steak, we're talking mutiny kind of stuff here.
Right. So, I'm just intrigued, and we need to move off of this, but I do have one more question. So you're down there for months on end. Does that not mess with your psyche some?
Well, it's just like your workday. I mean, everything is choreographed. There's a set work schedule. There's a set training schedule. And really what they try and do is they keep the men busy. Days can be very monotonous. And so when you have monotony, idle hands are the devil's workshop type of thing. So they work hard to make sure that those things don't happen. And there's training, there's your normal work and maintenance that you have to do, there's paperwork and everything else that the officers have to do, and then there's the normal routines of watch standing and everything else. And then even when there is idle time, it's meals, it's movies, and then they make sure you do sleep and stuff. So again, it goes back to, for me, what that showed is, and I've always worried about the well-being of the people I work with and who work for me as well. But it goes back to thinking about those sorts of things, what really can influence the real engagement of people in what they do. And when you watch the passion, believe it or not, of sailors and that sort of thing, they take it because you really show that you care by thinking about those simple things all day.
Meals would be important, but particularly in those situations, I would imagine. So that was intriguing. Let's talk about something else that's intriguing to me, and that is the explorations on Mars that you were referring to. What's that all about?
Well, one of the companies I worked for called Teledyne Energy Systems, which is still in business up in the Baltimore area, they have been involved for years and years in making small thermoelectric generators that are powered by radioactive decay. Thermoelectric generator is a little bimetallic material that if you put heat on it, it will actually create a potential electricity, and then if you close the circuit, it'll power something. So not very efficient devices, but when you're going someplace as far as Mars, you can't carry enough fuel or other stuff. So nuclear radioactive decay can last for years and years and years. So we specialized in that. Our first thermoelectric generator left the solar system on the Pioneer space probes that were launched way back in the early 70s and left the solar system, and I want to say 07 or 08, something like that. About 15 years ago, NASA was saying we're going to go to Mars with a big Volkswagen-sized rover to do a lot of exploration, and they can't just use photovoltaic cells to power that because it needs a lot of power to move a big, picture a big device, not quite as big as this room, but almost as big as this little studio here. So NASA put out a tender. We were the incumbent. We partnered with Boeing Company on a multi-$100 million development to develop a custom generator package. So picture a cylinder with heat radiation fins and radioactive containment devices and everything else, and package that with thermoelectric generators so that we can make enough power to move this thing around Mars and power all of its sensors. And it's been up there running. When did that launch? In 2015 or 2016? I've been here at Continental for a while, but a friend of mine that now works with us here actually got to go to the launch pad and see that go up.
That's pretty cool. That kind of stuff.
Very cool.
That kind of stuff is that's amazing that we have that kind of technology that we can send something like that to a planet that's however far Mars is away from us, a long way. My solar system geography is not that good, but I know it's not close. So.
It's a long way, Alan. As a CPA, I can tell you it's a big number.
Yeah, right. So currently you're the president and CEO of Continental Motors Group, and you don't get to this position by not having some leadership skills and good ones, I would think. So as this is a leadership podcast, the overarching theme is leadership and entrepreneurship. What's your view on leadership? What do you think makes a good leader, and what do you think has attributed to your success over the years in not only leading Continental Motors Group, but you've also helped restructure numbers of companies to get ready for divestiture or for acquisition. So what are some of the characteristics that you can point to?
Well, people miss so much, but one of the first things leaders has to do is develop a good team, and that's never easy. You've got to understand what are the objectives at that moment in time, what are the types of skills you need, because you can't do anything as a team of one. So that's always a first step, and as trite as it is, and I'm stealing from The Prophet, that TV show, but he summarizes it by saying it's people, process, product. Mm-hmm. But it always, for me, starts with the people. And so you've got to get in there, you've got to assess your team, you've got to think about the mission and say, do I have the right team for the mission? And if you don't, then your next question becomes, can I help them become the right team? Is there training that they need, mentoring that they need, or that sort of thing? Or if not, then yes, some changes have to be made. It's kind of like I said we wouldn't talk sports, but it's kind of like in sports. Sometimes if you're facing 8 in a box, you pull out your running back package and you put in your wide receiver package because you're going to say they're daring me to pass, so let's see if we can be successful doing that. That's kind of what you're doing. So you start with the people. And thing many people miss is that there are different cycles in business. And every business, and for example, Continental Motors has been continuously in business for since 1902, okay? We've had some rough patches, but we've never gone all the way into the B word. So that's a business that's been in business for over 115 years, never gone all the way off the deep end, but gotten close a few times. So when you have those things, your team may have to change. Your leader may have to change. Your supporting cast may have to change, or something else. And that again is what leaders, have to do. Now, after you get out of that, then you really have to take either product or process. And again, it kind of depends upon where you are. Do you have the right product? Are you developing it correctly, and everything else? And then you have to figure out what you want to do in order to drive growth or penetrate new markets and everything else. And then finally, process. You've got to look at that. And that's the process, whether it's the accounting process of how you manage your accounts receivable or your accounts payable, cash, all that stuff, as well as the process of production, purchasing, inventory control, selling, all those things. You've got to look at what are you doing. And then, once you really get those things in a good place, and I've been blessed for the last few years with a really great team that's gelled at Continental and doing a lot of good things, you can start to step back if those things are happening and your cycle's going right, and you can really then start focusing on strategy and long-term issues and everything else.
Mm-hmm. You talked a good bit about people and a bit about processes. As a green belt with Lean Six Sigma, I'm always intrigued by the processes. People are the most important, but process is important. So what have you seen at Continental? I mean, over 100 years. I mean, obviously, you haven't been there that whole time, but in the last few years with the changes in technology, and have you seen improvements due to artificial intelligence and robotics? And can you speak to that a bit as far as the processes?
Well, absolutely. The processes today are just so wide open as far as what you can do. And, the first warning that I would say with this is people get lost in all the technology today. They view the technology as being able to make everything better or fix every sin. And so the thing I've seen, whether it's with robotics or artificial intelligence or anything else, is still not looking at first principles. So what do I mean by that? You can put in the most sophisticated system in the world, but if you really don't understand the first principles of the way your business runs or needs to run, then you start to fall into expectations that you're not going to achieve because you don't know what the system is going to force you to do. And the biggest mistake I've seen with these types of systems, Earl, is people don't want to change. So you're going to hear me come back to people. When you put in a system, you need to understand that system's not going to fix the problems or get you the new things you want if you don't understand and conform to what the system does.
Right.
And too often you'll see people say, well, I've always done it this way. The system's going to let me keep doing it this way, but the system doesn't work that way. And then suddenly you get this wide divergence in results. Mm-hmm. So bringing those in, and Continental's going through that right now. So we just built a huge new building,
right,
and we're populating it with all new factory equipment. And so I was watching out my office doesn't have a window out onto the rain. My office looks out on the factory floor.
Sure.
And so I was watching them unbox our one of the new pieces of equipment that's coming in, which is an all robotic movement system. Mm-hmm. And the key is understanding that that's going to change the way the operator moves around the machine. But if we try and let the operator decide what he wants to do, then all of the advantages of that robotic movement system are going to be wasted.
Right.
So you have to work really hard with the people to get them comfortable with the change that implies.
Mm-hmm. Call that explaining the why.
Yep. When you've been talking about the team and the people and that kind of thing, I kept going back to, and I said I wouldn't talk about this anymore, but the military. I mean, because really that military is all about team, right? Teamwork and getting the right people in the right spots and removing folks if they're in the wrong spot, and then having a process, whether it's on a submarine or whatever. So that was I would imagine that was a very good training ground for you and what you're dealing with today and having to manage people and processes and that kind of thing. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They stress it. Usually what you see it is in standard procedures, ways of operating, then they train to those. They have emergency procedures, which are usually, 3, 4, 5 steps that you would do to stabilize any bad situation that you suddenly find yourself in. And once you're stable, then you can step back and decide where you go to next. And what I've found with all of this is any of these systems that you want to bring in, it starts with explaining, and Earl, you said it exactly why. Why are we doing this? What does it mean? How are you going to be affected, and why is this going to be better for you? And in a lot of our cases, it's improved ergonomics, less wear and tear on the human body, and all of those sorts of things. So the team members really get that. Then the next thing is making sure that you understand really what you're trying to achieve with it. So if it's productivity gains, that has certain outcomes. Either you use that extra productivity, meaning you're growing sales and everything else, or that extra productivity means you're taking cost out of the business. And again, those are things that you have to explain. The military, one of the things the military showed me is they train. They train. Then they train some more, and then they do the opposite. And I think too many businesses, and they view that as a cost, I think too many businesses and leaders miss that. We miss the training, the retraining, the opportunities that come with this so that you really can achieve the benefits and the continuous improvement that you're trying to
Exactly.
attain.
Yeah, that's great insight.
It is. And too often I think that training is viewed as a cost. When it's not a cost, it's an investment. It just doesn't show up on that balance sheet.
Well, I think and you're speaking as the accountant, and you're exactly right. I think it would show up on the balance sheet, and too many companies may miss this. And as a leader, let me say I miss it as well. It shows up on the balance sheet as increased enterprise value.
True.
But I don't think many businesses, they see that cost number on the P&L, and that's all they fixate on. They don't realize that part of their growth success, if they are growing, or their cost out success comes because they're investing in the team members, not just the process in some cases.
No, that's a great point, and I think that's, and we see it with our own clients that they short-sightedness a little bit, sometimes, and so you got to be in it for the long term, which that's a great point. So speaking of long term, look down the road 3 to 5 years. Where do you want Continental Motors to be? What's your kind of long term plan, or what would you like it to be for the business going forward the next few years?
That's a great question, and it's something I can wax poetic on, so you'll have to stop me. There's really two things for Continental. So the first thing to understand is we make small aircraft engines. I'd love to say that we sell engines over there to Airbus or Boeing. We don't. We make the aircraft engines for small propeller-driven aircraft. Now, the nice thing about that is there is not a new pilot out there that doesn't learn behind one of our engines most often. Okay? You can't fly the big jet if you didn't start out in a little propeller-powered airplane.
Right, yeah, makes sense.
So that's our kind of key near-term strategy. But then the real exciting part of this is, just like in the automotive sector where you're hearing more about electrification, hybridization, and autonomous vehicles, same thing is happening in aviation. And so there's this thing called urban air mobility. And we had Eric Lindbergh, the grandson of Charles Lindbergh, as our keynote speaker the other day at our grand ribbon cutting. And for those out there that listen to this that know the reference, the Jetsons, you remember that little car that went up and over and down and blew little soap bubbles out the tailpipe. Yeah. That's kind of, if you can picture that as what a lot of people are working on right now, is they're talking about vehicles and the technology is there, and you can picture it in the little kids' drones now, 4 and 6 little rotors that spin and it goes up and hovers and moves and can go horizontal and all that. What's happening is a lot of companies, including the Boeings, the Airbuses, the Bombardiers, all the players in this trade space, are starting to develop people-sized versions of those. Wow. And the concept is that because you can use electric motors now, you can shunt the power out to different configurations. So the classic aircraft that you see with the fixed wings and has to take off down a 5,000-foot runway and stuff is going away. The computing power, the materials technology is all there. Now, they're still going to need engines like we make in order to drive a generator to generate all the power that you need for an aircraft. There's a lot of people talking batteries, but batteries are a long way from being of a weight and power level, energy density level that you can do that. So the other area that we're investing heavily in is that technology area so that we are relevant as those types of vehicles come into play in the next decade or so.
I can't wait to fly down the road. Whatever. Let's not
fly down the road. I thought you were doing that now.
Anyway, no, that's very cool, and I'm excited that's a real thing. I mean, you hear about it, but then to talk to somebody that's actually, that's part of your long-term strategy. That's a cool thing.
Yeah.
Cutting edge. I love it. So, Rhett, you've been successful in restructuring some companies and leading to growth. There were several different instances of that. Were there any common factors that were there in turning those organizations around, or?
Yeah, and it's a leadership trap. So I'll tell you, usually when you're coming in to turn a company around, the skill sets, and I'll admit that's my real skill set is fixing things. It's a different skill set than running stuff every day. It's a skill set that takes micromanagement. So when you're really looking at stuff, you are coming in to things that are broken and things that aren't working right. You have, in business, you have unhappy customers, you have unhappy suppliers, you have unhappy team members, employees, and everything else. You have processes that have broken down, and so you can't take the luxury initially of coming in and going rah-rah to the team. You jump in and you start putting the fires out, and you start triaging everything and getting things to a stability point. And again, it still starts with people, process, product, but usually the processes are so broken, you're just trying to get rubber bands on and other stuff so that you can safely deliver product and keep things stable. You still go and look at the people. So my typical pattern there is come in and assess the team and make rapid decisions and changes where you have to. Get the processes stable, be highly visible. So when I've done this, I'm on the floor, I'm in the engineering spaces, I'm in the finance department every day, and I just would have a routine of walking around and making pit stops. One of the most important things there is you don't just talk to the key leaders and take their picture. That walkabout means you're getting out there and you're talking to the AP clerk, you're going out and talking to the machine operator, you're doing all that, and then you're personally visiting the key customers to understand what's going on and to tell them that you hear their pain, you're there to deal with it, but also to tell them these things take time.
Right.
So it's a process and a repeatable process, and there are certain people that are skilled in that set, and then there are people that are really skilled in the stability of running a company with good processes and going along in that way.
Really brings home the statement, no one knows the work like the individuals that's doing the work. So
yeah. One word that you keep saying is people. Has there been a person or people in your life that have been mentors? Who can you point to if there's anybody that's kind of had an impact on you, your leadership style, your view of business, anything like that?
Yes, it goes back. My third CEO, and you'd have to understand my whole story. Normally, you don't have three CEOs and one tour on one sub, so that's kind of where I learned troubleshooting and restructuring, unfortunately. But no, that CEO, he showed me, how to stand behind people, how to understand, weaknesses and not just give up, and showed how you focus on treating, in that case, what we called the crew, now what I call team members, as being that important thing. And again, everything in business, despite what you might hear many people say, comes back to the people. I mean, yes, it is people, process, product, but I can tell you something. You can have the best product in the world, and if you have bad people, you're toast. Yep. If you have the best process in the world and you have bad people, you're toast. You can have a mediocre product or mediocre processes, and if you have great people, you'll be okay. May not be as fun, but you'll be okay. So focusing on the people at the end of the day is really where you got to be.
I like that.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
So you reading anything these days? You got a book that you could recommend to us, or?
Well, I wish I had thought about that ahead of time. I'm reading right now a book, and I can't think of the title, but about the history of polar exploration, and it's about the Jeannette, which was one of the early American attempts to make it all the way to the pole.
I see.
It's got stories about leadership because the first attempt, the gentleman who ends up captaining the Jeanette was on the rescue party for the prior U.S. attempt to do this, and that boat failed because of a classic failure in leadership. It actually had a mutiny, and half the crew survived strictly because they floated away. They were camping out on the ice away from the other half of the crew, and the ice broke up, and they floated away and stayed on that ice for like 6 months before they were rescued. But I tend to read those books both because I'm passionate about history and I love that, and quite often those things show you a lot about leadership and what people do. The last leadership book I read, believe it or not, was Emotional Intelligence, which I read a few months ago, which was really a helpful book and just talking about how you look at people and how you handle and how you come off, and I can be a bit of a very intense guy. And even when I'm trying to poke fun or have fun, I tend to leave people with the thought that I just yelled at them. So I was trying to figure out if there are ways that I can moderate that. And my poor saint of a wife, who Earl knows, she puts up with it. But I can tell you that she does part of that because she hits hard.
Hey, that's good. Nothing wrong with that. So, other than Gator football, Florida Gator football, and history, any other hobbies that you do outside of work?
I enjoy fishing, mostly because my two boys enjoy it, and so that's a lot of fun. And then I enjoy woodworking. I'm kind of without my wood shop right now. It's all in a storage unit because when we moved, I lost my workshop, and I just haven't put a new one in yet. But no, I enjoy woodworking and reconditioning old woodworking equipment.
Okay, good. Last question. I mean, we could talk another hour, but we've got to wrap it up. But I like this question. I've asked it a lot here lately, but I love the insight that it gives. So if you could go back and tell 18-year-old Rhett Ross one thing, what would it be?
The key for me would be kind of two things, and this is funny, but this is personally for me in many areas. Number one would be to work on emotional intelligence much earlier. Because I can see that as an Achilles heel throughout my career. Or the number two item there would be to seek out some additional mentors that would help. I'm a driven person, so I've been a self-starter. I've volunteered for every gig I've taken, but because of that, I've not really had that mentoring and seasoning time in a couple of areas. So I would tell myself, slow down and take a little bit of time earlier on to cement some of those key leadership skills that are more the soft skills as opposed to all the hard skills that I have.
That's great.
Good stuff.
So taking that a step further, what are you telling your boys? You say you have two boys?
Well, I'm telling all three of them. I've got my daughter who's in college and my 17-year-old high school senior and my 11-year-old midlife crisis son. Love him to death. But no, I would tell them emotional intelligence is very important. That calmness, that sereneness allows you in any event to just project. And I can do it in crises. But what you're trying to do is do that when it's not a crisis, is just project that level-headedness that lets you listen all the time. And then the other thing I would tell them is patience. Don't try and run through your entire life in a day.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Very good.
Rhett, thanks a lot. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Very interesting.
Well, thanks for listening to our podcast today. To never miss an episode, subscribe to Playing Above the Line at iTunes and anywhere else you get your podcast. And be sure to leave us a rating. We'd love to know what you think about our show.
To contact us or to stay connected, follow us on social media at HBKCPAS on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.